but now I'm just delighted to invite up a longtime friend who was actually the first product manager at a little project called AWS back when it was $0 in revenue in 2006. And today is one of the senior leaders, leads all the go-to-market efforts for AWS. And for some of you that might not know it, AWS is now an $80 billion a year business, growing at over 25% a year. There was just earnings last week. I think 27% was the number, which means, just to put it in perspective, that they would be growing over $20 billion in the coming 12 months. Said another way, they would be growing in 1 year as much as the total size of the revenues of the Google Cloud. So something to think about as we invite up Matt to have a fireside chat discussion. Matt Garman.
Hey.
Maybe, Matt, just for context,
Sure.
I gave the very simple introduction, but you've also had a background prior to AWS and startups. Maybe just give the audience a little bit of a sense of your background, and including the journey at AWS, so we have that context before we jump into some topics.
Sure. Yeah, I worked at a couple of startups after undergrad. The first one we flamed out after about 18 months, so I got that badge. And then the next one went pretty well. My wife and I went, but eventually decided to go to business school. And part of my business school internship, actually, I decided to try working for a larger company. And so I came to Amazon for my business school internship in 2005. And it was with AWS pre-launch. And I thought that was a pretty interesting business idea. I didn't know if it would work, but I came back. And then, I was the first product manager. And I helped launch all the services. So I kind of did all of the initial things of kind of naming them and building pricing models for them and writing detail pages. And it was pretty fun since no one had ever kind of priced a thing like that before. So it was kind of fun to go do. And then, from there, took on more responsibility, grew a bunch of the engineering teams and product teams. For about 13 years, I led EC2, all of the AWS networking teams, EBS, our block storage, and built a container business and a bunch of other businesses along the way. And then about the beginning of 2020, changed entirely, and now I lead all of our go-to-market teams, so sales, marketing, partners, all that kind of stuff.
Well, not too often that you switch from the product side of the house to the the sales and marketing side of the house. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit. I think one of famously, both Amazon as a company and AWS as a subsidiary or a business within that, the company has been incredibly customer obsessed and customer focused, and I think maybe that's how somebody could make that transition successfully. Let's start at the beginning. Can you talk to us a little bit about the data and the data types and how that's evolved, going all the way back to S3 and the beginnings of AWS, and and the scale of that data, as a kind of a foundational point within intelligent apps?
Yeah. Well, it's I think there's probably not a conversation that I have with customers now where they're not laser focused on what do they do about the explosion of data inside of their company, whether it's a startup or a large enterprise. And I think when we go back to S3, we kind of said, okay, we're going to build a system where it can have a infinitely scalable data store. And as we've grown, we've seen there's been lots of different types of data a lot of times. So S3 is not perfect for everything. Sometimes you need a key value store. Sometimes you want a relational database. Sometimes you want a graph database. Sometimes, et cetera, right? And so we've built a whole bunch of services around storage and analytics to support those customer needs. But I think the observation that increasingly what we're seeing is customers saying, like, I have more data than I know what to do with, right? I have started talking to customers that are talking about the yottabytes of data that they're going to have, which, I don't know, it's a lot of zeros. It has nothing to do with Star Wars, apparently. It's just a lot of data. And they're saying, like, how do I organize that data? How do I think about that data? How do I get it? And they look, without the cloud, people would have no way of doing anything without that. So I think we've enabled a bunch of that, but there's a lot of interesting work there. And today, in addition to massive amounts of data, they are in lots of different places. Customers will say that I have data silos all over the place. I have a data lake over here that's in S3. And it turns out I don't even have one data lake. I have like 8 data lakes because every different department has their own data lake. And then I have some in my CRM system and then some in my SAP system. And I have no idea how to actually combine that together. And so I think that's one of the interesting challenges where customers are realizing that they can get interesting business value if they could combine data from over here and data from over here and do machine learning on top of that. But it's hard today.
Yeah, I remember some of the early days of AWS when you had things like the snowball and then the snowmobile and some of these data moving techniques that were very physical,
Yeah.
real world kind of capabilities. Even just getting data that's maybe some of my more legacy data up into the cloud has been
Yeah.
one of the first steps of this journey.
That's definitely one of the first journeys, is just how do you get a bunch of the legacy. Now the benefit is today most of the data either is generated in the cloud, so it's already there, so you don't have to move it, or as it's generated, it's moved up piece by piece, right? And so your phones are constantly updating uploading your data or whatever it is. But yeah, for a long period of time, the hardest thing was just how do you get a pipe that's even, if you have a gig connection to an office and you want to upload, whatever, huge amounts of data. We were calculating with some customers that it would take 10 years for them to upload their data into the cloud, and that by their 1 gig line that they had out of their office. And so that definitely was a limiter early on. I think where most, that is less, it's still an issue that folks deal with, and increasingly it's actually how do I get information and data from and to the edge, as opposed to from my individual data center, right? So it's I have interesting information in my stores at the edge, or I'm creating data in a factory and things like that, and how do I get that back up and down? And so that is increasingly kind of the new challenge that people are running into, but it still is a challenge. And it is, I think one of the benefits that we see from the cloud actually is that once you get all of that data in one place, and this goes to a bunch of the applications that folks are building, is that there's actually a great flywheel of then building applications near that data, so you don't ever have to move it again, right? You have it there. And what we've tried to do is make it as open as possible from the customer perspective, right? We don't want to lock it in any special format or whatever it is, so that any application that's built on top of us or anywhere else really can easily access that data and take advantage of it, so we don't have to kind of keep moving those exabytes of data around, because that's expensive and prohibitive.
So before we even get to machine learning and some of the elements there, tell us a little bit more about how you're helping people at that core layer of getting my data ingested, and maybe both talk about the kind of the first party things that you do, the first party services, and then we'll get into some of maybe the third party services that you work with to ingest data and then store data and then make it ready so that it's available for somebody to do something intelligent on top of it.
Yeah, I think that, it's not just ingesting the data. I think you want to have the right types of applications that can ingest the data and the right types of data in the right way, in the right format, so that it's not just blobs of data that are just stored somewhere but you don't know what to do with it. And so you have to index it and put it in the right data stores. So a lot of where we think about now is kind of take a step back and say, okay, what is the origination, like that form of that data? Is it going to be through a streaming service, at which point you can use Kinesis or MSK or something like that to stream the data in? Is it coming through IoT devices, at which point you actually probably want to have different tagging or metadata around that so that you know what to do with that data? And so it really kind of depends on, is it synchronous, is it asynchronous, is it streaming, is it, and how do you want to use that data, right? Is it something that's going into a data warehouse like a Snowflake or a Redshift or something like that? Is it data that's going into something like an OpenSearch or Elasticsearch cluster that you want to be able to do log analysis on or something like that? And so it really is, we spend a lot of time actually talking to customers. It used to just be, how do I get all the data in the cloud? And now we actually spend a lot of time thinking about, what do you want to get the value out of that data first? Because then if you can kind of think about, what are some of the things and ways that I may want to use all of that information that I'm generating, then we can kind of help customers understand this is how you're better able to get value out of it. Otherwise, it's just a giant blob somewhere in the, in the cloud, and you can't actually get value out of it.
And so when you kind of have those conversations with the customers, how do you help them think about, or how do they kind of work with you to think about, well, what services should I be using? Should I be using, these AWS services like a Redshift, or should I be using a Snowflake or a data? How does that process kind of play out over time? Again, sticking for another minute at the data infrastructure layer.
Yeah, well, we actually, a lot of times, and this is kind of what we do at Amazon, is we start with the customer and try to figure out what is it you're trying to accomplish, right? So we don't start with the hey, I have 5 services, let me try to sell you 5 services. We start with the really you as a business, what are you trying to accomplish? And so a lot of times we have a thing we call an executive visioning session, where we'll bring a customer in, the blank sheet of paper. Actually, it is we line all of the walls in the room with paper, and we do kind of people draw out as we're having a discussion, so we can kind of visualize the discussion. But we brainstorm with them on what is it that they're trying to accomplish. Most of these customers are trying to transform their businesses from and take advantage of new technologies, and so we'll think about how can we partner with you, what is the value you're trying to get, what are the important strategic objectives of your company. And then as we do that, we can kind of tease out, okay, these are the assets you have, this is the customer base you have, this is what you're trying to accomplish. And then we have experts in the room that are saying, okay, I can help you connect some of those dots. And oh, actually, we don't need to talk about OpenSearch because that's not going to solve the problem that you're talking about right here. And so that's how we start. We start with them. We try to have that. We actually will write down like a product plan of something that they want to try to go build and accomplish. And then we'll help them kind of tease through our solutions or partner solutions that kind of may be foundational for them to go build that. But a lot of times the customers are actually looking for us also to say, how do we help them innovate? Because they don't even know what's possible a lot of the times, honestly. And I think probably not the folks in this room. I think you guys are at the top 0.01% of thinking about kind of what the next generation of applications are. But if you go to the vast majority of companies out there, they don't really know what's possible. In fact, we have a organization called ML Labs, and their purpose is just to sit down with the customer and explain, like, how could you possibly use ML inside of your company to get, and we have, like, it's kind of a similar thing. We have a brainstorming session where we think about how could we apply ML to the problems that you have so that you just get that, like, people just aren't thinking about what is actually possible. And then once they kind of view that art of the possible, then you can go down to the technology and let them know, hey, here's a couple of solutions that may get you to where you want to go. But
That's perfect. Let's pick up on that, because there's a set of customers, probably many of the people in this room, that you might call do-it-yourselfers. And they're looking for a certain set of things. They might be looking for things like, hey, I just need those kind of those NVIDIA chips to train my model, or your Inferentia kind of service and things like that. We'll build up the stack to the do-it-with-me's and the do-it-for-me's, but let's start with the do-it-yourselfers.
Yeah.
And since you ran EC2 and all the different flavors of compute instances, what is the do-it-yourselfer in the ML deep learning world looking for from you?
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's price performance, like, and usually that's it. Like, and so if you really go at the floor, like, these are, I'm assuming the do-it-yourselfer folks have ML scientists. They have their own kind of models. They probably have their own, maybe some help with deploying the models and things like that, where they don't really want to mess with that. And so that gets into a little bit of the next level up. But mostly, they're looking for price performance. And so there's a couple of things that we've focused on for the last 15 years. And it turns out that, yes, you need to have the latest NVIDIA chip, and we do. And actually, I think I was talking to you earlier, one of the weird competitive advantages often that we find that's most compelling to customers like yourselves is making sure that we have capacity available. And so we do that. We spend a lot of time, and particularly for the last couple of years where capacity was not all that available, we spent a lot of time and have thinking really deeply about, and we use ML for this too, of thinking about how do we understand our supply chain, how do we have predictions around that, and we're thinking 3 to 5 years out about how to make sure I have power, how to have data centers, how do I have committed supply. And I think if you look back a year ago, a lot of people didn't have supply. It wasn't because they couldn't get chips. It was actually because they couldn't get boards, they couldn't get substrate, they couldn't get a bunch of the other things to build some of those servers. And we had planned for those level of components, not just asking Jensen if I could have more chips. And so you needed that. And then we also said, okay, that's important, but it turns out the networking is important too. And so we actually custom design all the way down to the network and all the way down to the communication layer of how do we make sure that we have the most efficient network, because people are building clusters of these things, right? If you're going and building large models, you want to have great cluster performance, not just single node performance. And then we also saw, okay, except that even at the scale that we have, these huge NVIDIA machines are super expensive, and we thought we could do it better. And we happen to have a really talented chip development team. And so we built, our first chip we built on the ML side was an inference chip. And we helped internally, I know our own stats, we helped Alexa save 70 to 80% off of their costs by moving to Inferentia, as opposed to using either CPUs or GPUs for their inference. And we just launched 2 months ago, our first training chip called Trainium. And it uses materially less power, it's much less expensive, and we're seeing customers see actually much better performance than some of the NVIDIA chips. And
Training and inference,
Yeah, and so we're still working on some of the software sides where where a lot of the ecosystem is built up around NVIDIA, but I anticipate within 6 to 12 months, Well, actually today you can get there with a little bit more work, and within 6 to 12 months, I think out of the box, most customers are going to see probably 50 to 60% better price performance out of Trainium, and we'll do future generations of that too. And so we're innovating at that layer to make sure that we are the best place to do any sort of ML workloads that you have to run.
So just like a lot of people, I remember back in 2007, we had an event, and you and Andy were there, and there were a bunch of startups, and we're like, do you really want to have to put like racks and servers and configure them and run them in, kind of probably in the closet, let us do that.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, they don't really want to mess with this infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
But they do want to, as you're talking about with ML Labs, they do want to build, intelligent applications or machine learning models. So
That's right.
if we move up the stack, there's kind of this layer of abstraction. I'll call it the do it with me people.
Yep.
And that's where I think things like SageMaker come in. So
That's right.
what is SageMaker? How does that work?
So we had this observation that built this great infrastructure, and then it turns out that there are not that many great deep machine learning scientists in the world. And so we had this vision of how can we make it so that really talented software developers could go build machine learning capabilities into their applications. And so we built SageMaker, which effectively makes it easier to go turn code into an ML model or application. And so it helps you, and we've been iterating really rapidly on SageMaker, but it's this whole kind of application level where you move up the level, and you're still tuning the model, the parameters of your model. You're still kind of writing your model, but it makes it easier to deploy. It makes it easier to do things like identifying bias in your model and other things like that. And we keep adding capabilities there where it's making it so great software developers can easily build ML into their applications. And so, it's not push button where like some, an analyst can just build a model, but it is that thing where it's like, I'm going to go build a great application. And now we're actually finding that even the folks that are very focused on that lower level, turns out they don't love running clusters either. They don't, and so they're actually moving up. And so we're finding more and more people actually prefer to operate at that SageMaker layer where they can pull in foundational models like you were talking about. They can pull in different pieces of what they're trying to do and then easily deploy both their training models as well as their inference models and not have to worry about that. It's kind of like it's this interesting thing where originally the cloud was so you didn't have to go rack and stack your own servers. And now people are saying, I don't even want to have to deal with my own instances necessarily. Like that's kind of the next level of having to deal with your data center. It's like, ugh, EC2, it's so hard. And so, which, some ways it is. so SageMaker is that next level up where it's like it manages the cluster for you. It does all the deployment. You can do a single click and kind of deploy your updated models out. It can do checks for you, all of those kind of things.
Well, and then you've even more recently added something like a partnership with Hugging Face, for example, one of our intelligent application 40 winners.
Yeah, we have a huge partnership with them. They're awesome, and it's this is part of the idea that like we don't want to be some sort of closed platform where everything you use has to be AWS. I think we from the very beginning when we started AWS, we knew that we wouldn't build everything. We knew we couldn't be everything. We thought we could build a great infrastructure layer and we'd build some interesting applications, and we knew that you all would build interesting applications too. And I think take Hugging Face as an example. It's a great library of awesome models, and so we actually embedded that into SageMaker, and we make it easy with just a click or two to deploy any and leverage a Hugging Face model that they host, just as easier, sometimes even easier than things that we have natively. And so that's integrated part of that, and we look at how we can build some of those partnerships because we want both other things integrated into SageMaker, and frankly, on everything we build, or even SageMaker integrated into other applications. We just announced a partnership with Salesforce where you can actually access SageMaker inside of Salesforce to use your Salesforce data, and you can actually just use SageMaker inside of that context. And so our goal is to kind of enable a bunch of these things, whether they're and to have it as open as possible so that we can kind of interoperate with a bunch of things.
And so this kind of do it with me, this middle layer of abstraction where SageMaker is, I also sense that people are continually asking for that to be simplified, kind of one or two clicks into Hugging Face.
Yep.
But there's another service that I heard about recently called Canvas, which is more of a kind of a lower code, no code way to build your models too. So how does that differ or complement SageMaker?
It's just increasingly we're just trying to figure out what are the places that are hard. That it turns out there's a lot of things that even if you're a very accomplished software developer that you don't necessarily want to do, right? You don't necessarily want to be totally abstracted away and just be, have us do everything for you, but you want it to be easier. And so we are often thinking about how do we, can we build a low-code interface to this where it's more visual, so you don't have to spend as much time actually coding, but you can do the logic that you're trying to do. Similar, we have a service called Code Whisperer, where as you're coding, we can actually like pull in suggestions for you, and you can write in natural language. I'm looking, I want to, write an application that can translate video to text, and it'll create that code for you. And so you don't even have to like know what the APIs are.
A little bit like Copilot to some degree.
Yeah,
It's another service. Yes. Yeah.
No, it is a better. It actually outperforms Copilot, but Peter can comment on that later. It's okay, but yeah, we're integrating that into a bunch of those tools too. So that, but the real idea is that you just want to make it easier, right? We call it muck. Originally, we said AWS is getting rid of the muck, so you can really focus on the important thing you're wanting to do. You don't really want to have to focus on typing out the exact. You want to think about the logic of the code of the application that you're building, and so Canvas kind of extrapolates that a little bit and gives you a little bit of a no-code interface to doing that, and we'll keep making it easier and easier at the SageMaker level, integrating with other models. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to integrate as many things and build as many things as quickly as possible, so you can focus on the actual differentiating things of what makes your application unique.
I'm curious, you mentioned and described them as sort of software developers and developers, and then we talked about the relative scarcity of data scientists, data engineers. Even inside AWS or Amazon more broadly, there's lots of services. You talked about Alexa earlier.
Yeah.
What's that conversation like? How are those worlds of the quote software developer and what I like to call the dataware developer kind of evolving inside Amazon and AWS?
Yeah, I think part of what we've done is we've made it so that it's not kind of any sort of competition, but we think about it, actually, inside of Amazon, we think about all of our AWS kind of services that are building block services as enablers too. And so our teams look at those just like you all do and say like, I'm gonna use that to go build a service. And so they love that they don't have to manage databases and they can just use Aurora. And they just don't have to worry about their databases. They love that they don't have to like get down into the muck of managing an ML model, and they just use and so internally they use SageMaker, right? And so you go to the Alexa team, they use SageMaker. They think it sounds fantastic. It didn't exist when they started, but they love using it now. And so, what it does is it actually accelerates our level and speed of innovation internally too, because they don't, in the same way that it accelerates innovation for startup companies, internally we think about, great, I don't have to do that, I don't have to do that, I don't have to do that, and I can continually just think about that, that data application that I'm going and building without having to do that infrastructure piece, which, we have a whole bunch of people at AWS that are thinking about.
Is there, and maybe there's not, sort of a kind of cultural thing between the software developer who by definition is supposed to be building something that runs predictably. It runs the same way every time, right? And
I love your optimism.
I know. Fair enough.
Allegedly, that is true, but
I'm exaggerating to make a point.
Okay.
And yet, a data scientist understands that they're trying to build something that runs predictively rather than predictably. That it actually is going to make a different recommendation prediction based on the model and the data that comes into it. So
I think there's. I don't find any sort of. Yes, there are differences in how you think about that, but we at least, I think from every year we build kind of annual plans for like what we think our roadmap is going to be and what we're going to go build for the next year, and we kind of build our business operational plan. And starting I think 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer, we asked every single team in Amazon. There's a set of questions that you answer as part of your plan. What went well, what didn't go well, what customers say about you, what's some feedback, et cetera. And one of the questions we added 10 years ago was, how are you going to use ML in your service? For every single service we had, whether it was our billing service, whether it was Redshift, whether it was, out there in the website, every service, how are you going to use ML? And so, for the first couple of years, the answers were kind of lame for some of them. Like they're like, I don't know, I can't. And we're like, nope, try again. But that kind of, now everybody thinks that way all the time. And so it's not, I don't think we don't really have this divide of there's like people thinking about, MLE type applications and traditional software. It's kind of the same.
No, that's helpful. And in fact, I remember maybe, 6-7 years ago, Jeff talking about this in his annual letter and how that, the use of data and machine learning was going to be one of the most disruptive, kind of new innovations. He likes to talk about how many things don't change over time, but that was one of the core drivers that was changing.
He does.
In addition, the sort of the last layer of the stack is kind of the do-it-for-me layer. And you have a whole bunch of services there as well, comprehend and translate and transcribe. And so tell us about why build those kind of finished services and how people choose to use those more finished services that I can just, you did it for me and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and so we have a couple of, and then maybe we'll get to kind of the application level too. But at these finished level services, we kind of we looked at the ML landscape, and we think the vast majority of applications are actually going to be built today, at least at the SageMaker level, where you're really doing something with a custom model. But there's some kind of building block set of things that you just, if it works really well, you don't need to redo. So take something like a transcribe, where you have an audio file and you want to make it into a like written file. If you can do that perfectly, like if I can give you an audio file and spit back a document, like I don't need anyone to rewrite that again. Like that's a waste of effort. And so we did that. Voice to speech, voice to text, text to voice, like all those kind of translations between one kind of file format and another. We just saw those as building blocks, where it's like maybe an insurance company is they want to, digitize a bunch of things they have, or and so there's comprehending voice, all those kind of things. And so we just built those up as building blocks, and we said, we think our own internal teams and external teams will move faster if they can use those as kind of core building blocks that they just put into their application. And so, they don't have no ML at all. You just, it's closer to like, you give you a file, I get a file. And that has proven to be true. I think there's some that we found more useful than others, and I think we're still learning on which ones are really, some of them just take off when we launch them and people just love them, and other ones kind of people can't quite figure out how to use exactly, but I continue to think that set of building blocks is going to be important, and we'll keep looking for other ones that we're missing.
That's great. Well, let's go into first-party applications then. Yep. So there's as you reference, and I've been in a distribution center and seen applications of ML within all kinds of parts. Of course, we live it with Alexa, but on the AWS front, tell me about a little bit the history of Connect. That's a very interesting service, and how did that come about? And what is it? Because some of the audience may not be as familiar with it. Yeah. And how is that kind of a first-party intelligent application?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We kind of, when we start a new business at Amazon, we kind of look at a couple of different flavors of like, when should we go into something? We want to make sure that it's a really large market so that it kind of matters and that we can focus on it. We want to make sure that we either think we have competency in that space or can acquire it really easily, and we want to think that there's something where it's not well served in the market where we can go out there and do something. And we looked at one of the things that Amazon has done over the years is has pretty decent customer service, well known for that, and we built a really large customer service team. And a lot of folks will use third-party applications for that. We were so large and grew so rapidly, we had to build our own stuff. And we looked at kind of some of that competency there and what we had learned in the customer service space, and we looked at what was out there at the time, and we said, we think this is a big opportunity for us to completely, there really had been no innovations in 30 years in how you run a call center. And so we saw that as an opportunity, and so we launched Connect, which is inspired by kind of all the stuff we learned at Amazon, but then built for the cloud and for third parties to use. And it's been a huge success. I think it's the idea being, if you want to have a call center, previously you would have taken 6, 12, 18 months and professional service contract to actually get it up and running usually. For us, we wanted it to be... And
that was off a packaged app, too.
Yeah, with a packaged app, right? Like, it's actually quite hard to do. We wanted it to be where push button, you could just have a call center, right? And it's not quite a push button. You have to connect in your IVR and stuff like that. But it's still, you still have to connect it into your telephony and things like that. But it's actually that comes bundled with it. And during COVID, we actually saw people spin up virtual call centers for really large, things like airlines and banks in less than a week for their entire operation. And so, and what we did is we said, we want to build it in the cloud. We want to build it so that if the call center folks can be operating from anywhere, and we want to build it with ML built in. And so we want to make it easy so that the employee or the customers didn't have to think about how do I add AI or interesting applications. And so we started with a couple of interesting ML applications, and we've added a bunch after that make it so that we have that intelligence kind of built into your point about intelligent applications, built into the application, so that right off with clicking you install it, you click an option, and You can get sentiment analysis from a call. You can get chat transcripts automatically from the call. You can install chat bots. You can have, I don't know if you guys, maybe many of you haven't seen a call center, but if you see often these call center folks, they have like 5 applications up as they're talking to you. It's like, you called, so I think I know who you are over here, but I still have to ask you 8 questions to verify who you actually are.
We've all had that experience.
Then I log into this other system over here to see, like, did you actually order something? And here's the other call center thing that's like, now I see like the last couple times you called in or whatever. And you have all these different screens. We actually listen to the call and pop up interesting information articles, so that when you're talking to the person and they say, yeah, I was interested in staying in a, say you're calling a Hyatt hotel chain, and you say, I'm interested in potentially staying in Florida, we'll pop up all the Hyatts in Florida, because we can hear that you're talking about Florida and things like that. So the call center person can be engaged, talking to you, quickly give you the information you need. We can tell if the call center person is getting, or if the person on the phone is getting upset, and immediately alert the manager, so they can actually come over and listen and see if they can jump in and help. You can do a bunch of those things, have automatic transcripts, have after the call analytics that say how things went, and all of that is just comes for the customer, and so they don't have to deal with any of those things. And we're inside of Connect, and so that's and we're just like the rest of the world, able to build on top of those. So we used Transcribe. We didn't go redo any of those things. We basically said, great, I can do chat transcripts with Transcribe. We use the various different ML capabilities that we have.
Some of your own finished services.
All of our own finished services, some of our SageMaker services, some of our underlying EC2 services, et cetera. And so it allows the Connect team to not have to worry about any of that either. But we can go to a insurance company and say, hey, we can do your call center, and they don't have to worry about any of the rest of the stuff, and they say, great.
So that's a great first-party example, and I would imagine you all are working on other first-party services like that could be similarly helpful. But you also work with third parties. So maybe talk a little bit about how other intelligent application services like an Amperity or a HighSpot or some of the ones in the intelligent application top 40 that we mentioned, work with you so that they can build and deliver their intelligent applications on top of AWS.
Yeah, I would say look, the vast majority of customers out there in the world interact through our partners, not through us. Our ISV ecosystem is incredibly robust, and I think part of what we do is we have a whole partner organization and many of these go-to-market efforts that help the teams, many of your companies included, kind of figure out how can we go co-sell. And this is something that we're continuing to learn with, and the partners are continuing to learn with how we do this. But when we go to a customer, a lot of times we'll say, hey, what are you looking for? And they'll say, hey, I'm looking for something that can kind of keep all of my customer data all together. And we'll say, we don't have anything like that, but Amperity sure does. And we'd love to introduce you to that. And we do a co-sell. And so we kind of have a training program and a bunch of different programs where we can actually go to customers together and introduce partners, because if it's built on AWS, then we win and the customer wins and our partners win. And I think we try to get that flywheel going. And then other times we'll have the partner say, hey, I'm talking to this customer, all their data is in AWS, they want to use us, but can we figure out how we integrate that together? And we have programs that can kind of connect those things up. And so we're trying to, a lot of times customers, and we kind of have to train some of the customers sometimes too. Sometimes they'll come to us and say, like, great, give me all the leads. We're like, well, that's not exactly how it works. It's not like a
right. This is the third-party ISVs.
Yeah, the third-party ISVs, right? And so it's not magic, right? It's not like it's like, oh yeah, here you go. Here's all the magic customers. But it's a joint thing where you kind of build up that relationship. And so we have a partner managers that'll go in and kind of explain how some of that works. And we learn about the product that the partner has. The partner learns about what our go-to-market motions are. And then we figure out how we can go co-sell together so that it's good for both of us.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll have time for just maybe a question from the audience or two. So I highlighted this notion of generative apps and foundation models being a subset of intelligent applications built on, robust, sources of data, kind of in enabling technologies. How are you approaching this whole generative apps and foundation model area? What are some of the things that you all are working on? Where do you see the future there?
Yeah. It's a super interesting space. Actually, I remember the first time I heard ever about a generative application was when I went to go visit Autodesk like 5 or 6 years ago, and they have generative design. It was a little different, but it was the same ideas. They basically had some models inside of like AutoCAD and things like that, and they're like, watch, we'll tell it to build a chair, but and we want it to be as light as possible, and it was like some crazy like weird looking design thing that the thing made that was like a chair that weighed like a third as much as the other chair, and it was like no chair that a human would design. And it was the first time I had kind of seen, and it's directionally like a very specific use case of this idea. And so now I think that the emergence of some of these foundational models is opening up what is possible. I think if you look at the cost of building one of those foundational models, it's incredible, right? It is hundreds of millions of dollars to go build a foundational model. And so it was prohibitive before we kind of built these foundational models. If you were going to build a model like that, it was just prohibitive for the vast majority of folks to go spend the money or they didn't have the data to actually build that model and train it. Now that we're building some of these large models that you can build on, where you can train it with thousands of examples instead of hundreds of millions of examples, it really opens up what's possible. And so we're thinking about how do we partner with all of those folks to make it easy to use that inside of AWS. We have some of our own internal foundational models where Lexa has one and others like that. But I think and we'll continue to think about how we expose some of those over time. But our goal is I want you to be able to use any, whether it's any of the ones you called out, whether it's Stability or GPT or OpenAI or whatever. I want to be able to use as many of those as possible. And you still want to be running those in the cloud. You want to have your applications running off of that. And so I think it's a hugely interesting with potential. It's an interesting space that has a lot of potential. I don't know exactly where it'll go, but some of the things that people are doing on them are it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and the trend, kind of contrasting OpenAI with something like Stable Diffusion, where they're, open sourcing and having a more open ability to go take their framework and then build your own foundation model and generative app.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be,
I think it has lots of
out.
implications for the future of a lot of, it could be incredibly disruptive for a lot of existing businesses, everything from search to design to kind of how a lot of the pieces, a lot of industries operate.
Yeah, so we think life sciences can be a huge area.
Life sciences is a great thing that could be entirely disrupted. Yep.
It's a little hard to see out there, but there's one burning question before we wrap up.
There's spotlights are in our face, so we can't really see if there's anyone. But.
Okay,
all right.
Terrific.
Matt Squared up there, Barry from Amperity. One of the things. Sorry, Barry from Amperity. One of the things
I wasn't even a plant. I didn't even know you were here. But
I appreciate the shout out. I wanted to keep the train rolling. I'm going to say Amperity 9 times before this question's over. Question I had for you is, I think we continue to see the innovation on a point basis with regards to the services, Pinpoint, Connect, Athena, et cetera. Just wondered what your vision was for a more horizontal app strategy over time. Are you thinking about that? Are you starting to position that with your larger customers?
What do you mean by a horizontal, like?
So a suite of services. So how does Connect and Pinpoint and Athena, how do they start to come together in a single, more business application play rather than the fairly technical developer-led play of individual services today?
Yeah, they may. I don't know. I think there's a couple things that we're thinking about. I don't know that there's like some overarching long-term strategy because it changes there is, but it changes every year. What I'd say is one of our focuses is to make, and one of the things that I think I personally would like to have us do a lot better at is help our services work better together. And so I think one of the reasons why AWS innovates so rapidly and we launch a huge number of services and a bunch of features more rapidly than I think a lot of organizations do is that we don't couple those things together. And so the Redshift team and the Pinpoint team and the Athena team or whatever, they are running full speed ahead. And we try to have connection points. And I think one of the things that leads to is you get this really rich set of AWS services that is incredibly broad and keeps growing rapidly and keeps giving you new capabilities rapidly. But we don't always make it as easy as possible to use some of those services together where it seems logical. And so some of the pieces we're building now are ways of thinking about how do you use some of those together. And so I don't know that it'll be a fully connected suite anytime soon. I think there's pros and cons to that model, right? You can have an Office bundle that works really well together, and it's a great product as a consumer. But it innovates a little bit more slowly because you have to kind of all make sure that you have to go. The Excel team has to talk to the Word team and make sure that their buttons look the same or whatever the things are. Microsoft's but any consumer application, right? That's regularly kind of how you have to innovate on. And so we try to break those apart as fast, because we don't want to have that coupling. We don't want to slow ourselves down, but recognizing that it would be really great if Redshift and Athena and S3 and SageMaker all could like seamlessly interoperate more easily than they do today. They do already because they're in the cloud, but if we could make all of that work really easily. And so we're thinking about ways that we can do some of those pieces. And I think the higher level apps, there's some application, there's some ability to do that too. And we're actually thinking even more broadly than that, then how do you make it really easy to also interoperate with our partners that are running in AWS as well. And so we've started thinking about, I mentioned Salesforce. How do we actually have some integrations with them where we make it really easy to pull your Salesforce data into your S3 data lake, do ML on top of all of your sets of data, and then push it back into your CRM or push it back into your SAP system or your system of record. And so I think we're kind of learning kind of what that looks like and how those interfaces are, but that's kind of the longer term vision. Is it would be awesome if your Imperity systems and all of your other SaaS applications that are also running in AWS, so your data is all there, can be, people may want to pull information from Imperity, some of it from Salesforce and some of it from your first party application, get insights on top of all of that, and then maybe push it back to the application that can then help, gain that insight. So long term, that's how I'd like to see those, but still remain decoupled so they can run fast.
Well, this has been a great discussion, really a terrific way to set the table. It's been fun to be a part of the journey with you at AWS for the last 15 years. Can't wait to see what the next 15 years hold. Thank you very much for being here with us,
Cool.
Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.